We're going to take a look at compositing two images together. Here we can see the final result. We have our subject, the model, in front of the Shanghai harbor. And we're going to take the model from another source, separate her out, bring her into this background, and try to balance her look with the look of the background scene. And as you can see from the layers here, we have a number of key things that we're working with. First of all, we have the background, then we have the subject layer with a layer mask. We also have this other layer mask. It's sort of a halo around the subject with a color tint applied to it. And then we have a solid color layer added with a degree of transparency in a blend mode. So we're going to composite all that together, and we'll just start with the source files. Now, if you want to make your life easier, and you're working with models, especially models with wispy hair like this, shoot them against a neutral background. This makes the specter of selecting the hair that much easier. Shooting a model against a varied background increases the complexity of the compositing process. So first off, starting with the model, we're going to build a very basic selection. And I'm going to avoid all of these complicated areas where we've got the wispy hair. Now, I could use the selection tool, the quick selection tool, or I could use the lasso tool. I'm going to use the lasso tool. I don't need to nail the selection right off the top. I just start selecting close to the edge, and like I said, avoid any of the questionable areas where it gets complicated. So although I'll select some of this hair here, I'll leave a little bit of a fringe on the edge. And again, I'm leaving a little bit of extra room here, just selecting the head area. If you want, remember, Shift key allows you to add more to your selection. And if you've selected too much, like in this area here, and you want to subtract it, the Option key allows you to subtract that portion of the selection. So I'll just continue with the Shift key and add a little bit more. And I'm just keeping it fairly close to the shoulders. As you can see, again, you don't have to do it all at once. Again, hold the Shift key down, move along here, make sure everything's selected. And there we have our basic selection. So we start with this, and then immediately in CC 2017, 2018, and so on, you go up here to select and mask. And choosing that, first of all, gives you a preview mode. And there's a number of different preview modes that are available to you. There's one here called Onion Skin, which is quite nice. It all depends on what your preferences are. If you just want to look at the mask itself, you can look at it in black and white. Or onion skinning it, I quite like this one. You can actually see the detail of the unselected areas so far. Now, there are a number of things that we should take a look at, like transparency controls the transparency of your onion skin. Edge detection is an automated function in Photoshop that has to go through and analyze where edges are. Now, edges are areas of difference. You'll notice there are no edges out here in the background because there are no objects in there, and we only see other objects when they are different, when they're a different hue, when they're a different value. We will start to detect them over and against the background. The background is characterized by similarity. The subject is characterized by difference. And where the background and the subject meet, there is a palpable difference. Photoshop is smart enough to see those differences and follow those differences and literally trace them out. we can have it follow a radius. So if we just look at my cursor on the screen, I'm just going to make it larger. It follows a radius in a circle just like this. And when we determine the radius using this slider here, we're telling Photoshop to examine the area within that circle of a certain radius and look for differences. So immediately within this circle that you see on the model's head, it's going to see a very clear demarcation line between the yellow background on the right and the brown areas of the hair on the left. And it's going to trace that out. And then it will continue along and do the same thing again and again and again until it's found the entire edge of the image. We can also tell it to use what's called a smart radius right down here. And by doing that, Photoshop is smart enough to know that for very obvious edges like the model's shoulders here, where there's a very clear demarcation point, you need a much smaller radius to sample that area and capture the edge. However, when you're in areas where there's wispy hair, as you can see here, it's much more complex, requiring a much larger sampling area. So by using Smart Radius, Photoshop will adjust the radius in which it's sampling. This is for efficiency's sake. It helps to speed it up. Now keep in mind this is GPU accelerated, but this Smart Radius ability allows Photoshop some decision-making capabilities. Globally, we can take the area selected by Photoshop and we can smooth those selections out. This can come in handy if you're working with images that aren't that high a resolution and you can actually see pixelation in that image. Photoshop might actually select the individual pixels, giving you a very staircase looking selection or a jagged selection. Smoothing, as the name implies, will smooth that out. Now feathering, as the name implies, will ghost the edge of your image. It'll reduce the image to a level of transparency of 100% from a level of opacity of 100%. And this gives you a very soft edge to the image. That's feathering. Now contrast is going to look and magnify differences. In a sense, it works opposite to feathering. When we have feathering, if we just look here, when we have a lot of feathering, this gives a very long and gradual transition from full showing of the image to full masking of the image over here in the black, with the gray values representing that gradual transition to transparency. With contrast, on the other hand, it literally reduces that boundary. The more contrast you give it, it will reduce any sort of intermediary grays that define the edge right down to zero. So it's sharp, crisp, and well defined. I know I'm using feathering to show this, but you will see how those two kind of reciprocate one another. So when we increase contrast, white becomes solid white, black becomes solid black, with no room in between for any intermediate values. You see how one offsets the other. I increased the contrast to the point where it literally obliterated the feathering that I'd set up here. Okay, so I'm just going to set those back to 0 for now. And you can also shift the edge. You can reduce the size of your selection, and you can increase the size of your selection. There's a little bit of a lag time here, so it's not showing it. I'm just going to hit 0. And then once we've built our selection, we need to output it. And there's a number of things here that we can do on outputting. We can decontaminate fringe colors. Our model's shot against a yellow background, so it's entirely likely there's a very yellow fringe around the edge of her skin where some of the background panel color is being reflected onto her. and we can decontaminate those edge boundaries and remove those colors. We want to be able to output it. And there's a number of options here. Output it to an existing layer mask, create a new layer, generate a new layer with mask into a new document with a layer mask. We're going to use this one here, new layer with layer mask. And that's going to be our output option. So let's just change our view setting back to onion skin. And now I'm going to take a look at these tools here. Just tear them off. And you have your quick selection tool. It works just like the normal one. We have the brush tool, where we can literally brush in black or white missing areas. So for instance, if I brush in here, you'll notice that it really is extending the mask. And if I paint too far, you'll see some of the background showing. So I can flip the color to black, in which case we're painting in black, just so you see this in black and white. We're painting the mask in white, or with the option key, we're removing things, or painting in black. Change it back to onion skin, and there you have it. So we can do a little touch-up just to make it a little more accurate. Do a little bit here, but I'm going to let Photoshop make all the decisions on the edge boundaries. And this is where this tool comes in. Of course, we've got the hand tool, magnifying tool, and we've also got the classic lasso tool. This is the refine edge brush. And this is us kind of working with Photoshop, letting it tackle the heavy lifting of finding all of the niggly-naggly little hairs. And we just paint in like this. And look at that. It's automatically seeing all of the fine detail in the hair. And it's able to separate it out from the background. Now, if you had to do this on your own, and I've done this before, it takes an inordinate amount of time. So why not let the computational power of Photoshop do that for you? So I'll just do a little bit at a time and come back, and I can go over spots. And of course, Photoshop's trying to figure out where that edge is. It's pretty simple for it here. You just coast along there, and you can see it's able to figure that out. And I'll just do another couple of passes there. That's doing a really nice job now with that edge. It's really making a huge difference now. I was having a little difficulty on that shoulder. However, as I'd mentioned before, just use your normal brush tool. And this is where you can take over on the easy stuff, because we don't want her shoulder ghosting out towards the edge. So we'll just make sure you can zoom in, of course, if you want, and get a little more detail there. And a little bit of the cheek needs retouching. I'll just quickly do that. Just check over here, the same thing. A little bit of the shoulder here is still problematic. There we go. We're getting rid of the ghosting effect on the edge of the shoulders. Alright, so now we're ready to generate the selection. And at this point, all I need to do is tell it how I want it to output. I want to create a new layer with a layer mask, and then I click OK. And there we have our model. Now, you can see the contamination of color there. There's a slight yellow edge. And so using the contamination function might have been a good idea. But I pretty much got what I need here. I can just go back in. Let's just take a look here. We've got our selection, and let's look at decontamination options. So we'll select decontamination of color. Now in 2018 there's an actual slider, so you can increase or decrease the intensity of this decontamination effect. And I'm just going to go with that for now. And then we're ready to bring it in. Oops. Sorry. What I neglected to show you there. As we go to, so I've got the mask selected. And I'll hit select and mask again. I'll choose decontamination of color. And I need to change my output option. I don't want to create a new layer with another layer mask. I just want to output it to, well, I guess I can just do it straight to new layer with layer mask. That's fine. And I can just get rid of the old copy. So there we have it. And now I'm ready to open up my background. So here it is. Just going to tear it off like this. And then we'll move it. Sorry, I should have done it the other way. Let's go to the subject. We'll just tear that off here. Now we can just move her directly into the image. And you can see that it's done a fairly good job. I'm not entirely satisfied with how it looks here. But for the most part, it's this is where smoothing would have come in very handy. Adding some smoothing, perhaps shifting the edge inward a little bit would have removed some of that yellow and some of that jaggedness. On the other side, it's done quite well. So it just takes a little bit of tweaking. At this point, we want to reduce the size of the image. So I'll zoom out. Command T is the shortcut. And I'll scale her down, holding the Shift key, and put her into the scene. Double click to commit that transformation. And now we've got her against that cityscape. The next thing we need to do is balance the scene. We'll pick up at that in just a sec.